Programme Manager at North East Combined Authority, where I lead a partnership called Net Zero North East England. I'll give you a little bit of an overview today on what Net Zero North East England is and what we're working towards, a bit of a picture for net zero transition in the region, and then I want to talk to you very specifically about an approach that we're taking to try and achieve our collective goals in relation to Scope 3, specifically in the public sector. So first off, a little bit about our partnership. Net Zero North East England is a partnership across public, private, voluntary and academic sectors in our region, which looks to accelerate our region's transition to net zero, and in doing so, create a cleaner, greener and fairer North East. So for cleaner, that means clean growth opportunities, more and better jobs and increased innovation. Greener is focused on environmental protection, restoration and improvement. And fairer is the concept of a just transition. So how do we ensure that everybody can participate, nobody suffers detriment as a result of our actions, and that opportunities are equally spread across our region? The partnership's been in existence since November 2022, and we are supported by a really strong and influential executive partnership board within the region, which I'm proud to say is co-chaired by the Mayor, our new Mayor, Kim McGuinness, who joined us in May this year, and also currently for business leadership by Heidi Mottram of Northumbrian Water. We're a convening partnership. It's about bringing people together. It's about sharing learning and best practice. And it's about celebrating regional success stories to show why we are the region and the place to do net zero. And I truly believe that the North East is. In addition, we are also have created an evidence base, a dashboard of indicators that demonstrate our regional progress. And I'm going to take you through a few of the most up-to-date charts from that evidence base now to try and give you a feel for what's actually happening within our region. This first one shows an index with 2005 equaling 100% of our emissions in comparison to the performance for England, where the North East region is the darker line. And as you can see, our decrease follows a very similar trend, but has always been slightly further ahead than the England average. And actually between 2005 and 2022, for which the most recent data is available, North East emissions decreased by 54%, which was a larger fall than England as a whole, which was down 43%. If you look at this differently and start looking at this by sector, you can see the following patterns there. You see that transport remains our largest area of emissions, with 31% of our emissions in this sector. And domestic falls quite shortly behind that, with 29% of emissions sitting in the domestic sector. The bars on the chart then look a little bit smaller, but you start to see that industry accounts for 13%, agriculture for 11%, commercial for 8%, and waste and the public sector for 4% of this chart. In the latest year of the data, we saw a decrease of 4.4%, which if you look, you can see a little bit of a blip in 2020, which everyone would see on their graphs. And then we went up again in 2021 as things started to get moving again after COVID. But that 4.4% has actually meant that over the last 3 years, from the pre-COVID year of 2019, we've actually seen a 10% reduction overall. So we're really seeing a good picture here. The one thing, though, that I do like to caveat that with, and you can see it here on this graph as well, is that one of the most significant things for us in our region has actually been the decline of industry, which is the blue line that you now see sitting at the bottom of this graph. And that decline of industry doesn't tell us our best picture. That means 78% of emissions in the industrial sector have been reduced, which is a great story. But because it's related to a lot of closure of industry, that's not always the best story for us to tell. We want to see more positive stories coming out of our regional transition, such as the fact that domestic is down 48%. That is a positive story, and that's really great for us to see that we're moving in that direction. And a lot of that has been led by our social housing providers and the work that they've been doing in this space, and also with the public sector and the work that's been done in the decarbonisation space there too. And just to pick out a couple of others, we've seen transport emissions drop by 22% in the same time period, 2005 to 22, and agriculture by 16%. So we are seeing movement. And just a final graph before I move on to talk about my next thing is just to compare those percentage changes by sector against the England averages. You can see when we look at it overall, back to that first chart, that we are ahead of the England average. But the picture isn't exactly the same for all of them. We are ahead actually in all areas, but some more substantially than others. So there is a bit of a story here. We think we're on the right trajectory, but we think that there's a lot more that needs to be done. And the partnership itself is bringing people together to try and help with that ambition and that overarching aim of acceleration for the transition. And one of the initiatives in which we've done that is what we're referring to as the North East Public Sector Low Carbon Framework. To give you a little bit of context, this started at a time where the region was progressing with devolution. Devolution for us means that we now have, as of May this year, the North East Combined Authority, which spans 7 local authority areas in our region, from Northumberland down to Durham. And it means that we have become the biggest combined authority in England by geography. We are also the most rural of any combined authority in England, but we also have the largest per capita investment. And this is really important because the amount of investment that's coming into the region gives us a real opportunity to do something special. And it also gives us an opportunity to collaborate in a way that we've never collaborated before. And so around September last year, there was an initiative that brought a range of different players from the public sector together in order to explore one of the biggest challenges that everyone's telling us they face, which is Scope 3. A lot of our regional targets for local authorities particularly have focused on the operational delivery, so what they can actually do, what's within their direct control. And then when they look outside of that and expand it further, that's where things start to become a little bit more challenging, because with Scope 3, it is indirect. It is about the influence that you can take and have on the emissions that sit within your supply chain, or influencing other areas such as staff mileage or commuting in order to see differences in your overall carbon footprint. And we know that greenhouse gas emissions, as shown on this slide, the reporting of those emissions exists to try and provide transparency so that opportunities for improvement can be identified and acted upon. And so we know that Scope 3, therefore, is a significant area for us to focus on. And with some organisations in the private sector claiming 95% of their emissions are Scope 3, we started trying to think about what it is that we could do to try and make a difference in this space. If we look at local authorities alone, Scope 3 emissions usually represent around 70 to 80% of local authorities' total emissions. And that's taken from climate change reporting guidance for local authorities. So actually looks at that across the whole picture of local authorities. And yet when we look at it regionally, we're seeing the same as well. What we see is that the majority of local authorities are reporting on Scope 1 and 2 emissions. You can see from the stat here that 92% of local authorities are doing so. And 67%, so 2/3, are now starting to look at some Scope 3. That typically includes staff mileage, water, and transmission and distribution losses from their electricity consumption, as you can see on the slide. What they're now starting to think about, though, is how they can report on other Scope 3 emissions. So looking at staff commuting, looking at outsourced contracts, but really focusing on procured goods and services. And it's that purchased goods and services piece that we decided to focus on, knowing that quite often the vast majority of Scope 3 emissions sits within this category. At the moment, within our region, the local authorities and other public sector organisations who are trying to calculate their Scope 3 are using the spend-based method to do so. This is classed as being the most simple way, looking at the amount you spend and applying a code to that in order to calculate what it is that your carbon footprint in this area is. But actually, what we want to try and move towards is something that's far more accurate than that, something that uses the supplier data in order to be able to show a truer picture. And we need to think about how we collectively address this problem. How do we move to that? How do we make it easier for all involved to do this? And another thing is, how can we actually be ahead of the curve when it comes to the reporting and influencing that's required in this space? So over the process of around 3 workshops and a few meetings since, we've been developing this idea and thinking about what we have the opportunity to do within our region. You can see here we held 3 workshops looking at how we mapped out our current activity and regional targets, how we identified gaps and challenges, how we thought about what good looked like, and what we thought about our barriers and external enablers. We also discussed supplier engagement methods and what is already happening within our region and could be considered best practice, and considered whether or not our limited geography of this new combined authority area is as far as we should go, or if we should start thinking wider than that. And that's led us to where we are now. So the bottom boxes that you see on here is at each stage of these workshops, what we felt we needed to be able to do in order to progress. We felt that it was really important that we had strong regional leadership in this space, that we can't just do it from a bottom-up approach, but we also needed to think about that top-down. We agreed that actually an overarching aim should be to agree minimum consistent guidelines and having a really non-onerous and simple way of reporting for suppliers to be able to feed information into the public sector within the region. In order to be able to do that, we said that we needed to better understand the barriers and the enablers that people are facing from various perspectives. It needs to happen from the procurement perspective. What are the procurement teams asked to do? Is it too much? What is it that they are required to do from regulation and legislation? And what is it that we can add on that would help with the journey? The climate leads have their own needs and asks as well, and we need to think about what they can do with the data. And actually, if we get this data in there, what is it that they're going to do with that, and ensure that there's consistency as well across the board. And finally, our suppliers. It's a big ask for suppliers to suddenly start providing some data that's actually relevant to each individual procuring organisation. So how can we make that easier? How can we ensure we're asking them the same questions and asking for the same level of data? And how can we be fair about how we then apply that data, whether they're a current or future supplier? And that's led to where we are now. So we've recently formed a task and finish group to try and develop and co-design this standardised regional approach. We're looking at the best practice of what's happened already across the region, including with NHS Hospitals Newcastle, and with others. And we're focusing on a way that we can standardise a process, make it easier for those who are involved, and try and provide support and guidance to all who are involved from a supplier side at the same time. If I've done my maths correctly, I think we're at 1 combined authority, 7 local authorities, 4 universities, 6 healthcare trusts, and 10 colleges. That's quite a substantial mix of organisations that can have an impact in this space. But we all need to understand what it is that the suppliers are telling us, the people who we're asking to provide this data, to make sure that it's something that's fit for purpose. And so I'd really encourage anybody to get involved and share with us your views on whether or not you think this standardised approach is the right way forward and what other things we need to be considering as we do so. And that brings me to my very last slide, which is my contact details. So please do get in touch if that's of interest to you. Thank you for listening.